Following the latest developments in and around Ukraine, joining me for an exclusive interview is Philippe Dickinson, Deputy Director at the Transatlantic Security Initiative Atlantic Council. Welcome to the program. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the reshuffle removes highly popular and effective Defense Minister Mykhailo Fedorov, who made it possible for the tables to be turned on the front lines of Russia. He modernized the army, oversaw a successful campaign of long-range strikes on strategic targets within Russia, and he maintained the pressure on Moscow. He is likely one of the architects of the deal based on the drone technology with the EU signed on Wednesday, in fact, in Kyiv. What is the logic behind removing such a character off the chessboard?
Yeah, well, it's not a one-man show. He's not acting alone, obviously, but he has been instrumental in pioneering the reforms and changes that have been really critical in turning the momentum on the battlefield in Ukraine's favor. He has achieved a lot, as you mentioned. He has introduced a lot of really valuable and critical reforms and spearheaded these, particularly on procurement as well. And given the generational and cultural divides within the Ukrainian armed forces, particularly the personal tensions that there obviously were with some other senior military leaders, who perhaps are more culturally grounded in Ukraine's past, there were tensions there that President Zelenskyy was trying to ride out and resolve, but unable to do so. And clearly the president has decided that he will side with the country's more traditional military leadership, lest he upset the armed forces dynamics there. I understand that the new defense minister is likely to continue many of the reforms that Fedorov was himself leading. So it's obviously a sort of a political management exercise on behalf of President Zelenskyy that he is trying to navigate. But given the popularity and the accomplishments of Fedorov in such a short time, it's caused a lot of people to question the decision.
You mentioned personal tensions. Was Fedorov too successful and had to be removed, or was it truly about the disagreements and the differences between him and Zelenskyy, who is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine?
We can only speculate. Only President Zelenskyy can really answer that question with any kind of reliability and credibility. I hope that it is not a question of him being too popular. That, I think, is some of the suggestion that critiques of this decision have inferred at, that this is President Zelenskyy trying to prevent other rival popular political leaders who could challenge him in the longer term. That should not be the focus for any Ukrainian leader at the moment. All of the focus and energy needs to be on winning the war, and then you can come to the political questions later in the line when the country is able to hold free and fair elections.
So, as it was reported earlier on the program by our Kyiv correspondent, Oz Karaji, the streets of Kyiv and other places across Ukraine are actually filled with protesters who are upset about the reshuffle. Can President Zelenskyy keep altering cabinets, delaying elections seemingly indefinitely? I know that there is a constitutional component to that as well, but will patience eventually run out in Ukraine?
It's going to depend on the situation on the battlefield. Right now, I don't think anybody is calling for elections because they know how impractical that is going to be. Now, should the battlefield situation completely change and things be much more stable, much more peaceful in that facilitates safe and fair free elections, should those continue to be blocked or hindered in any way, then yes, maybe in the future under that kind of scenario. But right now, I don't think that's the case. What the protesters are disappointed in is what some of the speculation around that has driven this decision to remove Fedorov, whether or not it relates to corruption concerns that have continued to the country, and what it means in terms of the generational balance of power, as it were. This is a kind of defeat for the younger generation. Minister Fedorov was 35 years old, seen as very much a kind of forward-looking, pioneering, westward-looking minister. And so for somebody of his profile to leave office is going to be very disappointing. What I think people want and need is a sense of stability and unity of purpose and focus. And the president has shuffled his cabinet a number of times, including the prime minister, who is also last week. That I think is driving some of the concerns.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned corruption. Ukraine is actively pursuing an EU membership with all hands on deck to make that very goal happen. With this reshuffle, commentators worry about possible democratic backsliding. What is the reaction in Brussels, do you think, following the reshuffle in the cabinet of ministers of Ukraine?
Brussels won't overreact. Brussels takes these kind of things. This is a long-term process. This is just one step along a multi-stage process that is required for joining the European Union. And so they won't overreact. But Minister Fedorov was very well liked, respected in Brussels. His accomplishments spoke for themselves. And not just Brussels, but in European capitals, as well as in Washington, D.C. A lot of people here really admired the bold approach that he had taken and the achievements that he was able to deliver in a short space of time.
And considering that a reshuffle, especially when it comes to the Ministry of Defense, do you think that Ukraine, with the current situation on the front line, can afford to have Fedorov removed by somebody else?
That remains to be seen. His successor may also do a fantastic job. So let's give his successor every chance and make sure that the key fundamentals that have driven Ukraine's success over recent months, which is the military tactics they have taken, the long-range strikes into Russia, bringing the war home to Moscow and St. Petersburg, continuing to drive the support amongst Europe, continuing to get American buy-in as well for supporting Ukraine. There are many, many dynamics to what it is going to take for Ukraine to ultimately win this war. And I think this is personally, but hopefully not a permanent one or one that can't be overcome. There's been lots of progress in recent months. So let's maintain focus on what has been working for Ukraine, regardless of the personnel.
Mm-hmm. In other news, President Zelenskyy announced on X just before we came to air that Ukraine will take steps to amend the relationship with Poland over the historic disagreements. I'll help myself with the notes because we read that first there are going to be diplomatic decisions on track. All archives of the Security Service of Ukraine and the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine concerning that very chapter in history will be opened, and there is a decision to grant a substantial number of permits for search and exhumation work to together build a more stable future going forward with the risk of Russia attacking further as well. This comes 2 days after President Zelenskyy took a jab at Poland while awarding an Order of Europe to Ursula von der Leyen. Is this decision rooted in genuine care for improving the relationship, or there was perhaps another reason for this announcement?
Again, I don't know. I can't speculate as to exactly what is driving President Zelenskyy to have taken the decision. But personally, any steps that can be taken to sort of cool tensions on this particular issue, which I fully understand and appreciate why people feel very, a great deal about this particular issue. As a general rule, it is not a good thing when politicians are driving the conversation about historical incidents rather than historians. Let's let the historians and the archivists and the real experts on this focus on it, rather than letting it become like a football in a political back and forth. Everybody needs to be focused at the political level on what is important right now, and that is unity in prosecuting this war against Russia, which we are all united on and need to maintain that focus on. The historical controversies, let the historians work on that.
And as our final question, I wanted to ask about the ongoing attacks and the exchange of blows between Ukraine and Russia. We've seen that exchange take place, especially in the area of the region of the Black Sea. But we know about the agreement, which was signed on Wednesday by President Zelenskyy and Ursula von der Leyen. Do you think that this agreement is going to be a game changer for Ukraine when it comes to the front line?
Look, it's hard to tell. I hope so. I think it's really important that any agreements between the EU and Ukraine, as well as agreements between NATO and Ukraine, continue to give Ukraine the kind of advantages that it has seen in recent months that have yielded great success. The focus on the attacks in the Black Sea, I think, just emphasized how important both sides, both Russia and Ukraine, see this moment in the battle as being. You know, the Crimea is isolated and has been cut off through large part to Ukrainian ingenuity in off Crimea from both the land and sea. So Russian reprisals and attacks on that, the escalation that Russia has taken has shown how important and critical this moment is in the war. But let's keep working together to press every advantage that we can in support of Ukraine.
Philip, thank you so much. Great to have you back on the show. Philippe Dickinson, Deputy Director at the Transatlantic Security Initiative Atlantic Council, was my guest. Thank you again. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. Thank you so much for joining, but don't go anywhere because we have Adam Yasser for On the Record speaking to Norman Davis, and we'll see you there.